So AI is, so popular right now. For you and your experiences, are there specific industries you see the most potential for AI?
Yeah, one of the areas that I'm most excited about is healthcare, and see it in so many different areas. But I think with healthcare and the opportunity there, because there's so much data in
Yep.
healthcare, and we have a lot of trained and labeled data sets, right? When we talk about it, like we understand patient outcomes,
Right.
and that's really been documented. Now I know there's regulation and some other things that we need to get through, but just the amount of training data sets and the opportunity for really to help out humankind, right? Whether it comes in from augmenting the ability in radiology and imaging to drug discovery. So there's a lot of potential there, and it's something that can really help humankind.
Yeah, and when you mentioned this keyword data too, right? And when we think about AI, it comes one with the other. Data is needed for training, it's needed for inference, right? But what do you think about when you think about the role of data specifically when putting AI into production?
Yeah, so data is the most important portion of that, right? We liken it to if you're building a rocket ship, and to leave the Earth, you have to hit 25,000 miles an hour. You need rocket fuel to do that, and data is that rocket fuel that really kind of propels you. So when we're talking about artificial intelligence and deep learning, really it's the data that kind of takes you to the next level. And I kind of look at it as, do you remember when businesses started trying to evaluate what the brand was worth, right? You think about Coke and some of the other big name brands. It was like, how do you put a dollar value on that?
Yeah, that's
Now
right.
we're doing that with data, and
Yeah.
data's that asset that continues to give back too. It's not, it's a renewable resource within the enterprise.
Yeah.
So it's pretty important.
And I like that. I like that analogy. Actually, that's a very interesting point. Good way to frame it. When I think about data too, I also think about infrastructure. Right, that's a big part of the AI challenge as well. It's not just the models; it's how we handle all this data. Now, the word data lake is another word that's been popular and tossed around, but traditionally it's been used in the context of specifically Hadoop, right? And that's where it kind of became a bit of a buzzword. How does what we're talking about with AI compare to Hadoop?
Yeah, I mean, so if you look at it, when we specifically talk around data lake, you're right. Like it's been kind of coined as thought about with big data and Hadoop and that ecosystem. But if you really look at what we're trying to build, it's a place to be able to service your data. And another buzzword right now is data gravity, right? And the ability to, as data grows, just like we are talking about a rocket ship trying to leave the Earth, that data is attracting more things. Well, it's attracting more data scientists, more applications, and more services. And it just becomes so large that you have to have a strategy. You can call it a data lake, you can call it a data hub, but you have to have an effective strategy for your data. And on the infrastructure side, that's one of the areas that is sometimes overlooked, right? It's really cool. There's a lot of research and a lot of things around how to build your models and how to make sure that your models are most effective.
Yep.
But what is the role of infrastructure impact in whenever they're trying to build out your models and finding out, hey, something that took 2 weeks to build or a week to build, and I've been trying to
Yeah.
retool those neural networks. It could be your infrastructure, and so there's an opportunity there with the right pipelines and the right strategy
Right.
to be able to do some troubleshooting there to make sure that you're building your models quicker.
Yeah, and speaking of infrastructure, an important aspect of that people often don't think about as much, but is critical is hardware. And I think when you think about the trends that are happening with edge computing, with on-prem computing versus cloud computing, I'm kind of curious what you're seeing out there and how people are thinking about how they handle their hardware behind all this.
I think it's only going to get more complicated, right? And that's a good thing, right? That's why we're in this industry and we're involved, because we think about just little things like maybe it's not a little thing, but 5G. Just the ability to have more data and be able to pull more data. So whether it's on your edge devices, you can actually pull data back in, and that gives you an opportunity. One, maybe you have to hold on to it for regulations, but it's also, as data scientists and data engineers they want more data, and so this gives them the ability to have that. Kind of goes back to what we were talking about with having a strategy. You got to have a strategy in place for how you're going to deal with that. Where you're going to make your decisions. Are you going to make your decisions at the edge? Are you going to pull your data back into a central location? And then how do you want to give that access and make sure that you have proper permissions and all the enterprise features that we talk about a lot.
Right. And speaking of strategy, when I think about something like DevOps, that's the entire concept is based around how do we kind of maximize productivity, in a developer-centric sort of organization, right, and make things work. Now, does that change at all for organizations that are incorporating AI technologies? Do you see DevOps principles having to shift around that?
I think it's changing everything. I mean, if you look at it really, so my background is really as a software engineer. And in the early days, if you think about what we did from an agile perspective, and DevOps is just another kind of continuation. So it's spread this ability to, be able to push things out a lot quicker and be able to have faster response time. So, I mean, for the analytics community, we're going to have to do that as well. So, whether it comes from deep learning and AI or anything, we want to be able to push it forward and be able to experiment and fail faster, just like any other application development team.
Right. And one last bit to you before we let you go. We're in the EU currently, specifically the UK, and the role of regulations is playing a greater role in how we think about AI and make decisions related to AI and data. How do regulations like GDPR play into the way data is managed in AI?
That's a huge point whenever we talk about going from a proof of concept into production. Like I said, before I was a developer, worked on a lot of proof of concepts, and if you've ever presented in front of, when you're going from POC into production, one of the things that early in my career and probably later on, I didn't really understand and do a good job of explaining was how we're going to provide for security, right? Like you get it, it's like, hey, everybody's on board, you've got a great product, you want to push it out to production, but how are we securing it? You kind of start going through all that portion. And so that's something if it's somewhat of a cliche, but if you start with the end in mind and start building that in, it's going to help you a whole lot more, right? And we've seen that every specific kind of different application development is like, hey, make sure we're doing the things to secure it, doing the things that are going to be regulation, because we want to get that product into production as quick as we can.
Right. Well, great. Thank you so much, Thomas, for this interview. Awesome.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.